Hey everybody, my name is Matt Pierce. I'm the Learning and Video Ambassador for TechSmith Corporation. Welcome to our live stream today. We're really excited to have you here. We've got a great guest, Jay Baer. He's coming up in just a second. Before we do that though, just remind you that we are monitoring chat. So if you've got questions you want to ask to myself or to Jay, please put those in the comments. We've got some help today, so we'll be able to get those the best we can. If we can't, we apologize. But like I said, we'll do our best. And of course, before we do that, I do want to remind everybody to go ahead and check out the TechSmith Academy. It's a free online learning platform that's available for anyone that wants to go learn how to make better video, better images, go learn how to write scripts, create storyboards, create instructional videos. We've got some fantastic interviews out there with folks who are really good at making video, and they shared advice about getting better on camera, about that pre-production. We've got instructional designers and learning professionals who also talk about creating great learning content. So again, go to academy.techsmith.com, check that out. So with that said though, let's get into the real reason we're here today. Let's welcome Jay Baer, our guest. He's the president of Convince and Convert, a best-selling author, and I'm sure more than that, Jay. So thank you for joining us, first of all.
Matt, fantastic to be here. Always fun to work with my friends at TechSmith, one of the software packages that I use every day. I was just logged into Camtasia and Snagit a moment ago before we turned it on. I am is indispensable to me in my work, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you being here, and thank you for using the products. We hope it's making your life a little bit easier. Jay,
so much.
Oh, good. I'm guessing that you've got a following, people that will tune in who will absolutely know who you are, but there's probably some people who maybe don't know who you are. Give us your little spiel of, like, why should we know you? Because I believe that everyone should know who you are, read your books,
Thanks.
Learn your content, but tell us
My
what
mom agrees. Thanks.
I'm sure she does.
I have been in digital marketing since the beginning, since 1993. So long ago, Matt, that this is actually true. My partners and I, in my very first internet company, sold the domain name Budweiser.com to Anheuser-Busch Brewing in 1993 for 50 cases of beer. And we genuinely thought like we got a pretty good deal on that. That's how long I've been doing this. So I have been involved in communicating via the web since you could do such a thing, generally speaking. I've had a series of consulting firms, Convince and Convert. My current firm was founded in 2008. We work with many of the world's most iconic brands to help them communicate better with video, with text, with audio, all things online, social media, and beyond. We work with Oracle, the United Nations, Hilton, Chiquita Banana, Bentley, a bunch of other great brands. It's a lot of fun. As mentioned, I've written 6 best-selling business books about marketing, about content marketing, about customer service, customer experience, etc. And I spend a lot of my time, or used to spend a lot of my time, traveling around giving presentations to audiences all around the world. Haven't done much of that lately, obviously, but doing a lot more virtual presentations here in the home studio, which has been a lot of fun. I also have currently 3 podcasts that I produce on a weekly basis, and a lot of others here or there. So staying busy, having a lot of fun, and having an incredible team. So it's nice to be with you as always.
Yeah, and Jay, you should probably take up some hobbies. It sounds like you've got a lot of spare time.
Oh, I do have hobbies. I am a certified barbecue judge, and I'm an avid tequila collector, and I am a boatsman. I have a boat in a lake near here, so I try to be on the water as much as I can. So that would be the three hobbies. Probably shouldn't combine them too much. Boating, tequila, and barbecue. Pick 2 out of 3.
That's right. You get the Venn diagram, and you get the perfect combination.
It's the greatest Venn diagram ever. Yeah.
Well, Jay, you mentioned that as a presenter, you've traveled all over the world giving presentations, but you're not doing that obviously with COVID-19 and restrictions, and it makes it difficult. And that's what we're really here to talk about, because you were so gracious to work with us, and we did some research. We looked at some data, talked to some people about how they were impacted. Now, I don't know if you want to set this up or if you want to have me set this up, but let's talk about this data that we collected, because I think this is what the heart is, and we can answer our questions all day long for people. But I think it's really important to see like what's happening out there. And I will note the research that we did was like back in March, so this is really early on, right? Mm-hmm. How people perceive they were going to be impacted. if they were speakers. So tell us a little bit about the group you spoke to.
My last live date was March 6th. I did an event at Caesar's Palace. It was also a client of ours, ironically. Did an event at Caesar's Palace March 6th, and that was it for me, as it was around that time for a number of other professional speakers. Some folks had gigs kind of trickled out into mid-March, but that was kind of the end of the run for most of us. And we worked together on a little survey that we extended to the professional speaking community in a couple different places. We put it in the National Speakers Association Facebook group, as well as a Facebook group, which is currently dark, but was called Speak and Spill, which had 500 or so professional speakers in it. And we just asked those speakers some questions about their attitudes about not doing live speaking and their embrace of video and technology, et cetera. And the results were pretty interesting. And again, Matt, I'm glad you set this up, that when we did this research, it was at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, at least in the U.S. and Canada. And so now, if we were to redo this research today, we might have some differences of opinion in terms of people's comfort with non-live speaking, et cetera. But it's fascinating to see where everybody's head was at, in the first week when you're saying, I'm definitely not going to have any live speaking for the next 3 months. And as it turns out, I think we're going to see very little for the rest of this year. It would be my prediction. And so if you've spent, like I have, 180 to 200 days a year giving live speeches for the last 11 years, and now you're doing none of that, it's a very interesting and different way to live your life.
Yeah, absolutely right. Like I can imagine.
A lot of time in this room, I got to tell you that. It's
it gives you more time for the boats, tequila, and the barbecue, I hope.
Indeed. Well, I tell you what, there's a lot of truth to that. We'll get into this a little bit, but I do not think I'm the only one in the speaking community who has realized, like at first it was like, oh no, I no longer have a career. And then it was, well, maybe we could figure out a way to make this work. And then it's like, you know what? This never getting on a plane is pretty dope. Like maybe we could lean into this a little bit. So,
yeah, for sure. And I think from my perspective, and when I looked at the data, and we're going to look at that in just a second, I think the thing that I saw, because I'm not a professional speaker. I don't, I do have the opportunity to speak occasionally at conferences and events, but it's not my primary role at TechSmith. But what I saw is that this kind of feeling is, I think, applicable to people who are doing other types of anything that required face-to-face, whether you're a trainer, whether you're sales, consulting, things like that, right? Like, I think there's a throughput here that says, yes, we talk to speakers, but it's not just about being a speaker.
Absolutely. You think about the impact of the pandemic on so many job categories that used to be solely face-to-face, whether you are a teacher, whether you own a yoga studio, as one of my friends do, whether you are the athletics trainer for a university sports team, as one of my friends is, whether you are a financial planner, as one of my friends are, whether you're an attorney, as one of my friends are. Like, all of those things relied on let me eyeball you in a small conference room, or literally let me put hands on you to adjust your positioning, and 0% of that is happening. And 100% of those categories, and many, many more that we didn't mention, are now relying either exclusively or at least significantly on some kind of video, whether it's recorded video, live video, some sort of video, and it has changed everything. And the question, I think, rightfully asked is, how much will we go back?
Right.
I don't know. We don't know yet, but I don't think we're going to go back all the way. I mean, people are already saying, like, just keep working from home. This is actually easier. Or you think about contactless delivery, right? So somebody brings you your pizza now. And it used to be they knock on the door and like, hey, what's up? Thanks for the pizza. Here's an extra $5 or whatever. And they hand you the pizza. And now they text you when they're, out front. And then you do like this hostage negotiation about the pizza, like where to put it, on the front or the back or on the lawn chair, on the planter, it's like this whole back and forth. And that's kind of funny. But like, ultimately, I don't need to go back. Like, I don't need to have like a micro relationship with the delivery driver. And we probably should have always done it that way. And I think there's a lot of things that we have learned that maybe this would have been better from the beginning. As I've been saying to people, we sort of fit like 36 months of digital transformation and sort of embrace of video into 36 days.
Yeah.
And that is, it's like, it's pretty hardcore. And all of a sudden it's like, well, guess what? If you didn't want to get familiar with video before, tough shit. You are now going to get familiar with video, period. That's why TechSmith Academy, for example, is such an incredible resource. Let me just say, we didn't set this up. Very familiar with TechSmith Academy. It is awesome. If you haven't had a chance to dive in there, it really is what you need to get comfortable with doing this. If you're not innately comfortable with it, it's super easy to use and really well executed.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, because that's our goal, right? It's not to necessarily sell software. It's really to make people feel more comfortable. And you're right about this digital transformation. I see that window, right? Even in my own experience, as you know, I've worked at a tech company now for 15 years, and looking at, you know, every day, got up, drove into the office, did my thing, came home, and now not doing that. You know, I know there's a lot of conversations going on. Even how do we work here in this situation and change kind of the whole dynamic of a company culture, because it's working, right? And we don't need necessarily the same infrastructure that we thought we needed, you know, 5 years ago or 3 years ago even.
Yeah, people say you couldn't create culture remotely, and I think we're proving that's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start looking at some of this data, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it will help tell the story of these folks that we've been talking about so far. So bringing up slide 1 here, Jay, so you're on the same page as me. This is clearly just a look at who was involved and some of the types of people that were involved in this survey. So you can see it looks like a pretty wide variety of people talking about, like, from a wide variety of expertise.
Yeah, which is certainly reflective of the speaking industry, right? So there are lots of people who are professional speakers, but they come at it from different perspectives, because different audiences need different lessons. So you've got the leadership and coaching group there with 72 respondents. That is, by all measures, the largest share of the speaking world. People always need to be motivated and fired up. You've got the branding, marketing, customer experience folks, which is sort of my crew. I will tell you that in the real world, that's probably oversampled in this data. The branding, marketing, customer experience share of the speaking business is probably not the second largest share. It's just that I know more of those people personally because that's the world that I live in.
Yep.
So we probably have more respondents in that category than we typically would if we would completely random sampled this. But I think what's really interesting in general, Matt, is there really isn't much at all in the world of research about speakers. Like they're just that doesn't exist. Like, people don't do it. Even the Speakers Association doesn't really publish public research about their members, et cetera. So to have the attitudes of, we have 309 professional speakers, that just is something that doesn't really happen or exist. So regardless of the outcomes of this research, the fact that it exists is pretty noteworthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting to see, because I'm not tuned into the speaking world per se. And it's interesting to see the variety that is there, even if it is a bit oversampled in some areas. It sounds like there's probably speakers that cover all sorts of areas, if not all areas.
Absolutely. You look at equality and inclusion, social change, social justice. There aren't as many of those speakers, but obviously, especially given the circumstances in the world, even since this research was conducted, a tremendous appetite for those kind of messages amongst a lot of corporate audiences, associations, et cetera. And so while there are certain parts of the speaking world, like sales and leadership and motivation, which will always be popular because it's human nature, there are other topics that tend to wax and wane based on larger societal factors. So you can see equality, inclusion, social change, that will rise, and rightfully so. I think we all believe that it should for the next couple of years and hopefully beyond. And then you have other things that maybe 2 or 3 years ago were white hot, like speaking about generations, right? So how do you work with millennials or Gen Z? And that tends to wax and wane, right? So as a new generation comes up, tons of interest. And then as that generation sort of becomes codified, then the interest goes down until the next generation comes up. So it tends to kind of follow a wave effect. And it's just interesting in the speaking business how different topics can vary in market demand from year to year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to our next slide. And this is the ways these presenters have presented or shared their experience. It looks like a lot of face-to-face, which you would totally expect from a group of speakers.
Yes, shocked it's not 100%. May have misread the question. Yeah. Yeah.
Looks like we got a lot of webinars, a lot of about 75% created videos for YouTube. And so these, of course, in the slide, the people could select more than one. So, obviously people don't just speak or just do webinars. So it's interesting to see that kind of how that long tail falls down. But it does look like a lot of people have created a video, and obviously YouTube is a popular destination, it seems like. Any thoughts from this one?
Partially because YouTube is where the preponderance of kind of speaker demo videos are located. So whether it's your sizzle reel kind of trailer, if you will, or excerpts of your main presentations, that's just where they are. They're just on YouTube. I think that the philosophy is that it's easiest for meeting planners to find you there, since YouTube has such a large search engine on top of it. Also, you can mark some clips private or things like that if you want to give it to a particular prospective client, et cetera. So I think you have a relatively high level of comfort with YouTube. And to see, 3 or 4 out of 10 doing some things in social, either with social video or live video, that smells right to me. It's a minority of the overall speaking community, but certainly growing over time, and because people realize this is a nice way to dimensionalize your expertise, just to create a 2-minute video on LinkedIn or what have you. And so there's been more and more interest in that over time. Some people do it better than others. Some people do it very randomly, like a couple times a year. And then there are lots of speakers, not by percentage, but just by raw numbers, who are doing daily videos. My friend Scott McCain has a daily Facebook Live show, which is terrific, right? So it just depends on kind of your own embrace of technology or your fear of technology. And some topics, I think some speaking topics are easier to chop up into smaller bites and deliver in a shorter window. Some aren't quite as easy to do that way.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that thinking about not only just your comfort level with the technology or your topic, but just your audience need, right? Like, do they expect you to be out there every day, or is once a week or once a month something that's, what do they want to consume? It seems like a big question that these speakers would have to answer as well for that.
Yeah, at some level you sort of think, well, if you build it, they will come. And there's some truth to that. I mean, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, Matt, in terms of cadence. I've done everything from daily to occasional and everything in between with video in my career. I think ultimately it's not so much what does your audience expect, it's what do you want to train your audience to expect.
Right. What's the promise?
And if you can deliver consistent value, you can do it every day, right? You can build an audience every day if it's valuable every day. But if you're doing it every day just to say you could do it every day and it's not always valuable, then that audience is going to decay over time. So what I always like to tell people is create content of any kind, video, audio, puppet show, it doesn't matter. Create content as often as you can, as long as it's awesome. The second it becomes not awesome, do it less so that it's always awesome, right? That should be the rule, right? If it's better than your audience expects every time, then you're going to be fine. So modify your cadence until you can over deliver always.
Love it. That's great advice, and great, and not just for live stuff, for live video, but any videos, right? Any content you're putting out there, make it
anything,
deliver awesome.
Haiku, it doesn't matter. Like anything you're making, if it's better than they expect, great. And maybe you can do it. If you're doing it once a week and it's awesome, maybe you can try to do it twice a week. But then the question becomes, if you've doubled your frequency, is it still awesome? And if it's yes, there's like, well, maybe we could do this 3 times a week. Is it still awesome? And as soon as you sort of get to that point, and the audience will tell you, you can just watch the analytics.
Yeah.
When you get to the point where it's like, you know what, you're trying to do too much, then you just pull it back one level and you're good.
Yeah, and I wonder though, I think we talk to a lot of beginners, people who are just new at this, and I'd say this is really great advice. My advice would also be like, you got to start someplace, so just you keep making stuff and you'll get better, and that's the only way to get better, right? Like don't wait until you're awesome to publish.
Well, and the idea that the idea that just because you made a video that an audience will instantly appear out of thin air, that doesn't work. That doesn't work even for professional speakers who have been doing this for years and have notoriety and an existing audience. It doesn't work like that, right? The biggest problem that people have is lack of patience.
For sure.
Right? They are like, well, I made a video. Yeah. Guess what? Seinfeld was almost canceled because the first 2 years of the show, nobody watched. People are like, oh, I watched Seinfeld from the very beginning. You didn't. You're lying. You definitely didn't. You went back and watched the old episodes later, right? Nobody watched it in the first 2 years, right? They almost canceled it. And that's true of everything in a lot of ways. There's very, very few instant successes, especially with online content, as much competition as there are. So, what I like to say is, if you're like, hey, I should start making videos. Yes, you should. But if you're not willing to stick this out for 6 months, don't start.
Absolutely.
Because you're likely to be disappointed.
Absolutely. Well, let's keep moving through the data here because lots to get through, and I know we've got some questions coming in from the audience that we're going to want to ask. So
awesome.
So feeling about the transition. Remember, this was in March, so we're talking about the kind of that first initial like, oh my gosh, everything's blowing up. I don't know what I'm going to do, and we can see that lots of different feelings. They could select one of the feelings. And actually, I think I like the next slide even better, slide 4, because
sort of rolled up. This is nicely done. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually surprised that oh crap wasn't higher.
Right.
This is, I think it's about 25-30% or something like that mathematically. 25 I think was oh crap and 75 was okay, I got this. That surprises me a little bit. And actually, based on the anecdotal feedback I got from people personally, I would have thought that it would almost be the reverse. But I think it does speak to the fact that speakers, I think, as a profession, tend to be pretty optimistic because ultimately, like, what is your actual business? You're convincing people that you know something they want to know and they're going to give you money to learn it. That's a pretty thin premise to begin with, right? I mean, like, it's not like you're like, okay, look at, I made a car for you, buy this car. I mean, the whole speaking revenue model is a little amorphous, from the beginning. And so I think that tends to attract people who have a little more comfort with ambiguity and uncertainty. And I think that's reflected here in this data. The one that I think is the most interesting, though, on this slide, Matt, is unprepared. Yeah. 46 out of 300, right? That's the one that I find the most interesting because I can see you being nervous, sure, and I can see you being sad, mad, scared, what have you, pandemic for sure. Unprepared, and to me, that will never happen again, right? Because everybody will be prepared next time. I mean, the amount of money and time and effort speakers have put into being able to do live streams or videos since March is, I don't know what it is, but it's a lot because I know what I have spent and I know what lots of my friends have spent on cameras and lights and Camtasia and processing power and everything else. It's no joke. It is no longer optional, and like we said, whether you wanted to do this or not, you no longer have a choice.
Yeah. I want to read 2 comments that came in because I think that this is very relevant to what we're saying. Marilyn says we were still in denial back in March. And then Maureen says, I think, oh crap, got higher as we realized what the job of production crew entailed.
It's such a great point. The idea of, well, hey, I give speeches. I could just give a speech online.
Yeah.
That's where you sort of get the excited or the neutral or maybe the nervous. But then we're like, oh, and I've got to have a whole new AV setup and I have to master not just Zoom, but also Camtasia or similar. And maybe I got to master Ecamm or Switcher Studio or Restream.io or StreamYard. And I also have to be able to, look at live chats at the same time I'm presenting. It's a lot. I'm super fortunate because my team and I have done live events for more than a decade. I've done hundreds of these before the pandemic. So for me, I was like, okay, great. Don't have to leave the house. Super. But for a lot of other people who have almost always sort of done it in the traditional face-to-face way, it was like, okay, let's do it. And then you realize, oh, it's not quite as easy as we thought. It would be interesting if we would have done this in, say, I don't know, mid-May. Maybe you would have had even less enthusiasm. But I think now, just anecdotally, again, I don't have data on this, people sort of pushed through that wall and said, okay, like, yeah, man, this is more work than I thought. But again, I don't really have a choice. To me, the way I would frame it up is this whole like get comfortable virtually is like learning a language, right? It's like, okay, here's the deal. You make X dollars a year, right? From now on, you make $0 until you learn Portuguese. That's like literally what it's like. And so you might be like, bro, I don't want to learn Portuguese. And then you start learning Portuguese, like that totally sucks. It sounds like fiche dish miche. It's like really, really hard to learn. But you're like, well, I don't make any money until I learn Portuguese, so I better suck it up and figure it out. And that's like sort of the pattern that has occurred, I think.
Yeah, I know when we talked in preparation for this meeting, I told you the story that my son, he moved to Mexico and he didn't know any Spanish. And within 6-7 months, he says, I'm not fluent, but boy, he can communicate with anybody he needs to about most things. And it's like, you put yourself in that circumstance and you're going to learn, which I think you're exactly right with this, right? The technology is there. Yes, it can be challenging. You got to learn the cameras, the lights, all the things that you talked about. But as soon as you start and you make your first thing, the next one becomes just a little bit easier.
It's such a good point, Matt, that it becomes easier every time. And what I like to tell people, especially, using tools like yours from TechSmith, it's not hard. None of this is hard. It is complicated. And to me, there's a difference between hard and complicated. Hard means you have to develop some sort of skill, and really some sort of capability. Complicated just means you got to figure it out, right? And I think it really is that more so than it is the former, at least that's how I see it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's exactly the right kind of metaphor for it. It's not hard. It is complicated. And there are a lot of great resources out there, ours included, that will help people through that. So it's not something that's impossible to overcome either.
And part of it is you tend to make your own complexity, right? So I like to think of video creation in virtual presentations sort of like Microsoft Excel, in that if you just want to total up some columns of numbers, like that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
But if you want to start making pivot tables, you're probably going to have to put some real time into this. And that's why I think there's sort of a good analog here, that if you want to make some credible videos, most speakers have the communication part down. That's how they're trained. You can do it pretty easily, especially with tools that are easy out of the box like Camtasia. But if you want to do, 4 cameras and switchers and everything else, like there's going to be another level of learning there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's keep moving on the slides here, because I think we've got a few more here that we want to cover. Cool. So the next one, interest in areas for potential revenue streams. So this is where people are looking to say like, hey, now that I'm not speaking, how am I thinking about going about actually making my money? Yeah.
Realtor wasn't on here, was a surprise. I figured there'd be like working at McDonald's, also not on there, and maybe should have been. But it's interesting because I think, again, I don't know this to be true, but my assessment is that a lot of these were ideas that speakers had already thought about adding to their business models. And I can speak from experience in this regard. It's hard to add another revenue stream when you're constantly traveling. Yeah. Not impossible. And there's a lot of speakers who have done it successfully. Maybe they're better at time management than me. Entirely possible. But it's hard to be like, and let's do this other thing and this other thing, when you're so busy doing the first thing. It's like trying to pinstripe a moving car. But something like paid online courses, for example, has been attractive to speakers for the longest time because it is the closest thing that speaking can get to passive income. And it's like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Paid online course. And every speaker knows some other speaker who's making a tremendous amount of money doing paid online courses. And then you're like, man, why am I not doing that? Like, I know a thing that people would pay to know. How come I'm not monetizing it that way? And it becomes frustrating and sort of self-defeating at some level. So that doesn't really surprise me. Consulting, same thing, right? Just take what you know and sort of do it on a one-to-one or one-to-few basis. But I thought the YouTube channel as an actual revenue stream was fascinating. That's the one on this chart that really, obviously virtual summits and events and kind of speaking through Zoom or what have you, that stands to reason. 2/3 of the audience thought so, but 54% saying I'm going to create and monetize, presumably, a YouTube channel. That was fascinating, actually higher than I thought, because making a YouTube channel isn't terribly difficult, Matt. You know this. Making money on a YouTube channel is not quite the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, totally doable, but
it is. It definitely feels like, from my experience of watching people do this, and I've not tried to monetize a YouTube channel, but I have talked to a number of people that have, and those people are really successful. It is a long-term grind. It is not a year, 2 years. It's like, you talk to like Jeremy Vest or Roberta Blake, and they'll tell you they've been cranking at it for like 10 plus years.
Yeah, I think for a lot of speakers who may have said, hey, let's go to YouTube instead of doing live speeches, by the time the YouTube channel even starts getting some acceleration, you might be doing live speeches again.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting that all these are playing into the thing that you're already doing too, right? Like, it's not like it's a big jump to, like you said, to make a paid course or do a YouTube channel. It's just literally a pivot from I'm speaking to a live audience to I'm speaking to a camera. But and maybe it's, I think we just kind of grouped the different, I don't know if we asked them specifically for these or if we just took their open answers and grouped them, but no one really went afield, right? Like, no one went off to these other opportunities that aren't like speaking, which, I guess makes sense when you're in the middle of a pandemic, you don't know what to do, like do the thing you know.
Yeah, and I think it's do the thing you know, but again, since we did this in early March, it's what's the fastest thing you could do?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, those may not even be the best ideas, but in terms of what thing could I theoretically turn on quickest, that makes a lot of sense. Whether it's a course or mastermind groups as well, et cetera. It's take the existing body of knowledge and just charge for it in a different way. Consulting, mastermind group, virtual summit, online course, right? Those are all just pricing schemes for the same knowledge base. That's the path of least resistance to revenue. So that it makes sense why that happened. But as more time goes on, you're exactly right, Matt. If we ask this, maybe not even now, but if we ask this in September, right? And so people have had 6 months to really think through, all right, what kind of business can you be in and do you want to be in? It might be interesting to see what you come up with. It might be people saying, hey, I want to join the circus or something.
Sure.
Probably not, but maybe.
Maybe virtual circus.
Dan Thurman would do that since he can juggle.
Well, let's keep going here, because I know the next couple slides we've got some good data and there's some questions again that are going to be related to the stuff that we're going to show. So this was biggest concerns with creating and sharing digital presentations versus live. Of course, we've talked some about that, like just the complexity of going to use all the equipment and stuff like that. But the number one thing here is, I think, is really where I'm seeing some of the questions come in. It's about that audience engagement interaction. I've spoken, I think my largest group was like 500 people. It was a tech conference, and it was awesome. But I could see the faces, right? I could pick out a couple people and see, find the grumpy guy, see if I could make him smile or whatever. But when you're in these environments, you really can't see your audience. So what do you do, Jay?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So to some degree, this depends on what kind of speaker you are. If you tend to do a lot of workshops and breakouts where your material is typically delivered with more interaction and interactivity, then definitely that's maybe troublesome. If you're doing more keynotes where it's more of a stand and deliver model, yes, you're right. You can't read the room in the same way. But I will tell you, having done this for a long time and done a lot of virtual events now, even since the pandemic, I actually like it better. And this is going to sound controversial and bizarre, but let me tell you why. I can look at whoever I want when they've got all their cameras turned on, and I almost always insist that cameras are on when I'm doing virtual things, and you can see people's facial expressions in a way that you cannot see from the stage because they're in close-up as opposed to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 150 feet away. In a real audience, you can see the first 2 rows. You can't see anybody past that. So now I can see whoever I want, wherever I want. I can lock in on individual people. And what I will tell you is that as somebody who primarily does keynotes, even if you do Q&A in a live presentation, and I typically don't, it usually sucks because somebody has to get up out of their chair and go to a microphone that's on a stand in between the aisles or raise their hand, and then someone runs them a microphone. There's a big gap of dead air during that. And then they ask the question, and the question may or may not be any good, and it may be too specific to their world. And then you got to answer, and everybody's going to sit there and listen to it. And it's just usually not the highlight of the event. In this case, though, 2 things are true. One, as a presenter, when people are asking questions in a chat or a Q&A, I get to pick the question. And I can pick questions that I know are going to be valuable to most people. I can sequence the questions in real time for maximum audience benefit. And I have discovered that it is, I don't know the percentage, I'm going to say 1 billion% more likely that somebody will ask a question in a virtual event than they will in a live event. Because in a live event, you got to go through this whole process of raising your hand and asking the question. And now you're nervous because what if the question does suck and everybody's going to laugh at you or think you're an idiot? But people are just like freestyling, right? In a chat or an online Q&A, question. So I think that you actually get way better audience interaction virtually, and I actually like it better for that reason.
No, and that's great. In fact, speaking of questions, Tony asked this question about using polling for. Are you using a lot of polling? Do you find that's an effective way, another way to bring in the audience?
I do. I use polls a lot to kind of get them used to the keyboard because it tends to then result in more questions and comments later. It sort of warms them up. I will tell you, though, having emceed a ton of these, that you don't want to go to that well too many times. It gets a little rote and a little boring. So I typically would use no more than 2 or 3 in a regular kind of 45 or 60-minute performance. I will say, though, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, Matt, but one of the things that I love to do, especially in webinar platforms like Zoom or On24 or GoTo or WebEx, et cetera, when you use polls or ask questions of people that they can answer in the chat, in most cases, those responses will actually append to the attendee record. So when we're doing webinars, like for my own consulting team, we'll ask questions like, now that this webinar is concluded, how likely are you to shift some of your budget from X to Y? Mm-hmm. And their answers to the poll question makes it more interactive because it's a poll. But those answers actually then attend to the record. We can export that, and it's amazing information for the sales team. So you can actually use polls and chats to develop more information about the audience, which you can then use to further some business objectives. A little fun fact there. But there are also a lot of other ways to do audience interaction beyond just the built-in polling. So sometimes you can do what I call a finger poll. So you have everybody turn on their cameras and say, okay, here's option 1, here's option 2, option 3. Hold up however many fingers you think it is. Right. And so that's kind of a fun way to do it. Right. Sometimes you can just do polls in the chat. I do this a lot. Right. Where I don't necessarily put up the actual poll graphic, but it's like, OK, is it ABC? Put your answer in the chat. It's not quite as scientific. So there's a lot of different ways you can build that interaction without just using the polling function per se.
Well, I saw one speaker, and this was a small event, so it was probably about 50 people in total in a Zoom meeting. And the speaker, he's a professor, and it was with some youth. They were, he was talking to them, and the thing I loved is he'd be like, "Oh, hey there, Emily, tell me about this," or because you also get to see, like in Zoom at least, you get to see everyone's name.
Everybody's name tag is present. Yes.
Yeah. So he was able to use that, which I thought was actually a really cool interaction piece, because then he could draw in individuals who may have already been engaged, but he could really, he'd randomly say people's names, and you knew if he said it, they were on edge. So it was really cool.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And that's one of the things I try to do. I try and mention at least 20 names in every session. That's sort of like my own kind of number that I try to work off of. And every time you're sort of in a little in a little gap, right? You sort of say, oh, here's a question from whatever. And it just makes people feel like you're paying attention and they're important. And I got to tell you, I really mean this when I say, once you get over your historical bias towards live events, there are a lot of ways that virtual events are actually better.
Yeah. I can totally see that. I think with everything we've talked about, I think the hard part is I think a lot of people see ones that aren't good. And therefore,
there's a lot of really bad webinars out there. Yes,
for sure. Well, actually, another question here. Paul wanted to know if you ever use planted questions. You ever get questions kind of seeded in so that they'll come up so you can answer them? Or do you just expect that people are going to ask good questions?
Always. Okay. We always have them. Almost never need them, but always have them. Yeah, we always have seed questions that I've written or our partners have written just in case. And usually what happens if we need them, it's just for a moment, right? It's once you get the first question, then everybody's like, yeah, okay, cool. And then the questions start pouring in. I don't know if I've ever needed 2 seed questions, but every once in a while you need one to warm them up. But if you start using polls and you ask them to use the chat early on, so very simple technique, you log in and say, hey, as everybody's coming in, it's great. Hey, I see Matt here. I see Marilyn here. I see Tony here. That's fantastic. Hey, as we get started, just curious, everybody's working from home. Put in the chat what city you're dialing in from. Now, and everybody does that because it's super lightweight. Now they're comfortable with the keyboard. And now you can be like, oh, and Bob's coming from Indianapolis and Susan's coming from Istanbul. So now you're using that opportunity to recognize the audience. So now they know that you're paying attention and builds that kind of emotional connection. And then when it comes time to ask for questions, they're not scared of the keyboard because they've already been using it. The other thing I would encourage people to do in virtual events is typically the cadence for a speech is hold your questions to the end. I don't do that. It's if you've got a question, ask it at any time. Because I'd rather sort of back and forth it a little bit more and make it more conversational. You have to be a little careful about your time, which is why the way I set up my virtual events is different than in a live event. Live event, usually the computer is with the tech table. And so, you kind of got to do the process. It's harder to skip. Mm-hmm. When I do virtual events, I always have my technology set up that I can go to any slide at any point. So if I'm like, all right, we took a bunch of questions in the middle, now we're running short on time, I can just manually skip ahead 6 slides and still land the plane on time. So I set it up a little differently for that reason.
No, that makes a ton of sense. One last question, then we can move on. But the question was really about getting others to engage with each other. Is that like participants talking to each other? I mean, you mentioned breakouts and stuff like that in small. Mm-hmm. I think that works smaller groups. If you have bigger groups, do you encourage that kind of activity, or is that something you would recommend people try?
It can be a little challenging in a main virtual event where everybody's in the same room, although sometimes it does happen. Somebody will say, hey, you may ask them at the beginning, Matt, where are you dialing in from? And so they're like, oh, I'm from there. I'm just from right down the road. And they kind of start doing their own thing, what have you. Right. But more and more of the virtual event technology platforms allow for breakouts, right? And they actually have a breakout room feature. And that can be really useful. I haven't done too much of it. I've done a few, and it can be really cool. So you can replicate that kind of experience. Kind of like
everyone's sitting at their round table and introduce themselves or whatever. Yep. Yeah, I was actually part of one of those. It was a group out of Minneapolis, and they had their business meeting before I was speaking to them, and they were actually talking about diversity and things like that, and how they can change and actively do their group. And they put everybody in breakout groups, had them use the whiteboard, capture notes. So it was a really nice experience, right? It was intimate. It was just a couple people. Everyone felt like they could talk. So yeah, definitely lots of things you can do here to engage your audience. That's not just...
whiteboard's a good example too. Like, so that's an underutilized function in most platforms, is the ability to draw on the screen and annotate your own slides and things like that, which is, again, something that you could do in a live environment. If you had a Wacom tablet, a tablet connected to your laptop that then goes on the slides, like, it's doable, but it's actually way easier to do it in a virtual environment and sort of draw on your own stuff, which again humanizes the speaker, builds a little bit more connection. I haven't done too much of that yet, but I want to do more of it. I've seen some people do it. I really like the technique.
Yeah, for sure. If you haven't seen Dan Rome, if you know Dan Rome, he wrote a book, Back of the Napkin. He's been doing drawing in his sessions. They were live, of course. I'm sure they work even better virtual because he just uses PowerPoint and a pen and
Yeah.
draws a lot and conveys a lot of really great information. Well, I want to move through. I want to get to the last two slides. I know there's some other questions we'll try to get to here if we can. But this next slide was really positive outcomes you might want from the switch to the digital reach. Not surprising, right? To see like a broader reach. Obviously digital, you can reach more people with a video or with a live event than you can in a capacitated room. A room can maybe fit 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, but your digital can go anywhere. So
yeah, you're not buying chicken for people, or anything else. Yeah, that, and I think that's also the hope for a lot of meeting planners too, right? Is that maybe you can't charge quite as much, but you can reach more people, and so the economics work better because your expenses are lower. So I think that's the calculus that everybody's trying to figure out right now, and it certainly differs from an event to an event basis. But I think there actually is a lot of upside there. The one that I thought was really interesting here, Matt, was the ability to continue audience interactions, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier. Not only do you get richer interaction during the session if you structure it that way, but you get more information about the participant, right? What did they comment on in the poll, in the chat, and I can follow up with them on that, which is really interesting. And certainly the ability to have less travel, which is the number 3 one. It's that is certainly attractive to many speakers, and it is to me as well. I didn't realize how much it stressed me out until I stopped doing it.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. It's going through the airport. It's not all fun and games.
Yeah, especially now. Wasn't fun and games then. Not particularly not fun and games now.
Yeah. So I actually saw a question here. Let me just see if I can bring it up. So with virtual conferences, I think this idea of between ability to continue audience interactions. Is there thoughts that you have about encouraging engagement between sessions? Like, let's say you're having, obviously if it's just one presentation, there's not another one to be in between. But if you're doing like a day event where maybe they're going in and out of different kind of breakouts or whatever,
yes.
Are there ways that you would suggest that people could benefit from interacting? Is that something you would encourage or not something you've done or thought about?
One of the great similarities between live events and virtual events is that they have the same risk profile. And that risk is people's need to pee.
Yep.
If nobody ever had to pee, it would be way easier to keep an audience live or on the computer. On the computer, though, especially in a work from home environment, people have so many distractions, right? Restroom, children, dogs, mailman, there's more distractions at home than there are in the office. And so your real risk factor is not during the session. Your risk factor is, as the question posits, is in between sessions. And that's why I'm such a big believer, and some of this is self-serving because I do this partially for a living, but such a big believer in MCs. So what we always tell our clients is if you're doing a virtual event that's got more than 3 speakers or is longer than 3 hours, get an MC and a host. Because keeping the energy super high in that 5 whatever minutes between sessions is critical. And that can be interactive polls. It can be giveaways and contests. It can be summaries of what you just heard and what you're going to hear and kind of stitching together the content. Critical, critical, critical. Because the second that energy drops, people are like, you know what? This would be a good time to go pee. And then they decide to get a drink. And then they check the mail. And then that's it. And then they're not coming back, right? So it's really, really important to those 5 minutes or whatever the minutes are critical. And it is a skill for sure.
It's interesting at TechSmith we have lots of meetings. Of course, now we're all remote. We've actually said the first 5 minutes of any meeting longer than I think it's 30 minutes is dedicated for social time to interact. And actually you don't start the meeting because people are allowed to be late that 5 minutes so they can go to the bathroom. But also during that time, talk to your peers or talk to your coworkers in this case, because you're not having the same kind of water cooler conversations. And I know it's different for big events. You're not maybe going to have that, but I can totally get see the throughput, right? Like that. Yes, you need energy. You need people to talk. You need people to feel comfortable and to feel like they're related to whoever's there. And I love that idea of stitching together what you've heard. Like the MC becomes the master storyteller.
Yeah.
weaving it all together to bring around maybe those kind of really tangible essential points.
Yeah, one of the things I'll do when I'm emceeing virtual summits is after sort of a chunky session like that, ask people to put into the chat their number one takeaway from what they just heard. What's the one thing you're going to put into practice immediately? And not only does that make them kind of reconsider what they just heard and try to apply it to their regular life, but it then provides a lot of great feedback for the organizers and the speaker as well. But then I'll read a bunch of those off. Matt, that's a great point. I love the way you phrase that and sort of interact with the audience. But then I'll do a lot of prizes and giveaways. So the ones I really like Matt, I like that one so much. Boom, you get a T-shirt. Sheila, that was a great point. You're going to get a tote bag, right? And sort of do that kind of game show style production as well.
Yeah, love it. So one of the questions, we've got one more slide, but I want to ask you this question. So I know in a lot of cases, Jay, you talked about having an MC. There's a question that about should you have someone doing the tech? Like if it's a big event, should let's say I be running the tech while you're speaking. But also, what's the role of actually pre-recording speakers in all of this? Is there a place for that? Should speakers always be
Huge.
Live?
No, they definitely should not. And I use Camtasia to pre-record content all the time for virtual summits and keynotes and things like that. Even webinars that we do semi-live, that we sort of go through the motions of them being live, but the content itself is pre-recorded. In fact, I'm doing one tomorrow. Here's why. One, if it's pre-recorded, the chances of you having a tech problem go down. Not to zero, but definitely goes down. Two, most people who are not professional speakers, and even many professional speakers who haven't done as much virtual, are less comfortable doing a presentation virtually. Because you might not be on your feet. You don't have a stage in the same way. You don't have the audience's feedback. It's like people who do radio. Radio is really hard until you've done radio a lot, because you're like, is this thing on? Like, is anybody listening here?
Yeah.
The actual physical delivery of the information is awkward. And so you usually aren't as good, frankly, when you do virtual presentations. So being able to pre-record it and be like, you know what, that wasn't my best. Let me take another swing at that. That's awesome. And for people who don't speak professionally, when I do virtual MC stuff, I almost always want the company speaker or the client speaker or the customer speaker or whatever. I almost always advise that those are pre-recorded, because they will be much more comfortable themselves, which makes a better performance and a better event. But the third one is one that you might not be thinking about, friends, which is I love the ability to pre-record my talk, play the video, but then be in the chat during the playback. Because when people have questions, I can be answering them as I'm talking on video and really interact with people in that way. And it's a really nice experience for the attendees, and I really enjoy it as well.
All right, Jay, we got one more slide, and I know we've got to ask the question for Tony about, he wants to know mic and camera, but we'll get to that in a second, because last slide. So biggest challenge to connecting with audience digitally, and we've talked probably a lot about these things. You can see that the engagement again came up, and we've talked a lot about that. You've got lack of body language. We talked about that. Building an online following and audience, competing with digital noise. Definitely, that's a challenge, right? It's gonna take, I think that goes back to what you said, 6 months. Don't plan on doing videos.
Well, look, your competition in live speaking is anybody who's hired to be a live speaker. Your competition online is everybody.
Right.
It's a different set of competitors, right? So that people who answered that question that way are absolutely right. But I thought the technology one, and which is like 9%, and the how to create interactive content, etc. And it's not hard. It's just complicated. I really believe that anybody who is a speaker or a presenter of any kind, again, whether you're a financial planner, an attorney, a yoga teacher, a personal trainer, a realtor, an accountant, anybody who has meaningful conversations with customers on a regular basis can and should master this stuff. And it's totally doable. It really is. This is not that hard. It's actually not hard at all, just complicated.
Yeah, it feels like as we go forward in this digital world, the skill sets of reading, writing, arithmetic, and then, it feels like more and more the skill of video has a
It's
play
the
there.
3 R's plus V. Yeah.
Yeah. At least in my mind. And I tell my kids, I've got 2 college-age kids, and I've told them for years, like, learning how to do this will only benefit you, because if you have this skill, it doesn't matter what your role is. You can use this skill in that role.
That's exactly right. I mean, we've done a lot of work at my consulting firm in the last year training salespeople, how to do, good video, even in a social context. Like, how can a salesperson do a quick video on LinkedIn, which can reach some prospects, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm going to go to the well here. We've got about 5 minutes, and I want to get to some of these questions. So let's ask the question right now. Mic and camera you're using because they say you look and sound great, Jay.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. This is a Panasonic camcorder. I forget the exact model number. It's like VX750 or something like that. It's a 4K camcorder that I just have hooked up through a USB to my computer. I have a second camera that I haven't used today, which is a Canon M50 with a 50 millimeter lens, which creates that nice blurry bokeh effect. Historically, that wouldn't work very well in this particular setting because the Canon cameras would actually show the focus box in the feed, which sucks, but they just rolled out a new software patch for it, which takes it away, thank God. So now I can run both those cameras. I sometimes also run my phone as a camera, because your phone's pretty high quality typically, as sort of like a behind the scenes cam, like off to the side where I'll kind of look that way on a little tripod. So I usually have 3 cameras set up, 2 softbox lights, and then the one behind me. And this microphone, which I like a lot, is the Rode Procaster. I typically use it for podcasts because I have 3 podcasts that I record every week, but I use it for video as well. The only problem with this microphone is it's directional. So you got to be right down the barrel here. If I just move it a little bit, like you lose me a lot.
Yeah.
Unless I'm right back here. And for example, Matt's microphone, the Yeti is better for omnidirectional. He also has a setting for it. So that microphone is a little more flexible. This one, you really have to pay attention to where it is, which is why, whether I like it or not, this microphone's always in the shot. The only way it couldn't be in the shot is if I hung it from the ceiling right out of the frame. Yep. And I'm just too lazy to do that, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, such an important thing to think about, though, right? Like, and this is where that the complicatedness comes in, is that you've got to think about mics, you got to think about cameras. I've spent a long time thinking about, and I've been only doing live streaming really since March, but like, how do I hook up my iPhone? Because I don't have another camera, but it's better than the webcam that the Mac has. So yeah, really, really good. And thank you for sharing those. And
on the iPhone, I'll just tell you, if I put it in the chat, the software to buy is called NDI HX camera, which is the worst name of a product maybe ever. It doesn't even make any sense. NDI HX camera. I think it's like $10 or something. And then it turns your iPhone just through Wi-Fi. It's pretty awesome, into another camera, which is great. If you don't want to invest in another expensive camera, you just want to have that ability to cut away to another scene. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So, yeah, and there's lots of great things out there that you can do without adding a lot to your budget. I mean, you can do with
and you can put it all into Camtasia and then edit it in there, which is what I do. Like, I do so many videos that I could and probably should be using some sort of super pro package, right, from one of the other big software companies, but I don't, because I know Camtasia and it's super easy and it's super flexible. I edit all my podcasts in there in the audio only console. I don't use GarageBand. I use Camtasia. I do everything in there because I know it and it's fast.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you saying all those things. We did not prompt that, but we're always happy that you do say it, Jay. We're so great. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Thanks for going through the data with us, all the tips you provided. Yeah. This has been super fun for me to, think about these things and go deeper. I'm looking to see if we've got any questions here. I don't think we've got any more coming in. I did see someone asked if they said they missed the beginning. These are recorded, so you'll be able to go back on Facebook, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn and watch all these things. Jay, I want to thank you once again for joining me today. I appreciate all your time and your great insights. Last thing we're going to do here just before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody that if you are new to video and you're trying to figure this all out, check out the TechSmith Academy, academy.techsmith.com. It's a free learning resource. Go learn how to get better audio in your own environment, use lighting, how to set up your cameras for good shots, write scripts, get advice from some experts. So again, we appreciate everybody for tuning in today. Thanks again. And we'll see you guys next week on Thursday. We'll be back live. And Jay, thanks again. We sure appreciate it.
You bet, buddy. Take care.
Yep. And now I got to figure out how to on Ecamm to wrap everything up. It's been a while since I've tried this. So